Hello everyone, I'm Alan Parkinson. I'm Managing Director of Hindsight Software. I've got close to 25 years experience in software development, both in safety critical systems and financial services and e-commerce systems. I've been helping a range of companies over the last 12 years with Hindsight Software adopting new development practices.
Hi, I'm Heather Carey-Skinner. I'm Director of Fieldfare Consulting. I started life out as a scientist, but about 15 years ago, I decided to move into the world of quality assurance and regulatory affairs for medical devices. I have over 7 years experience working with different software companies, and about 2 years ago, I decided to fly solo and start up my own consulting. And I've been working with Alan for about a year now.
So today we're going to talk about how a real-life software project for a medical device went wrong, its particular pain points, how software development practices have improved in financial services, and how we can learn as medical device manufacturers from that and adopt a shift-left approach.
So, I'm going to start off with a little story. So, a little while ago, I worked for an amazing software startup company. I was employee number 12, so we were small. There was the exec team, a bunch of scientists, and some developers. So as the company's success grew and we raised more money, our teams got bigger and they effectively became a bit siloed. And that's when difficulties started to happen. So the product roadmap became very reactive to customer needs and demands. There was no proper communication of this between the different teams, and therefore there was very poor planning of the release. And often not, the compliance teams, the quality assurance and regulatory affairs teams were the last to hear. We were often considered a burden to the innovation and therefore often excluded from important meetings. There was also a lack of enterprise software, so there was no document management system and lack of visibility. And piecing together the compliance documents with the software development team was time-consuming and very taxing. So with this pain often meant that the development sprints became very overloaded. The teams were very stressed out. The technical debt was huge because nothing could be done about it because they were too busy getting out new product features. And in turn, the compliance documentation wasn't done at all. So there were no timely risk management meetings. The requirements weren't approved on time, and verification validation activities weren't documented properly, and a lot of these activities had to be shoehorned in. And also the compliance team weren't consulted at risk points within the development process, and this meant that there was a delay in the product release as the compliance documents were done and retrofitted, and it was a very stressful race to the end. And often this meant an extra 3 to 4 months were needed to fulfill these compliance tasks. But despite these issues, the lessons were learnt, and we worked to remove this last mile. So the quality and regulatory activities became part of the development and not an afterthought. So how did we do this? So we looked at what was termed the forgotten work, and we identified key compliance processes that need to be part of the sprints. So one of the fundamental topics is risk management and clinical risk management. So we scheduled regular meetings for any upcoming releases of the product, and all stakeholders were involved in these meetings from all the different groups within the company. So risks were looked at per requirement in terms of clinical, safety and cybersecurity, and scoring of these risks were done as a team rather than an individual, and we were agreeing controls as a group. And we worked better as a team because of this. We had better understanding of the product, and we also meant that the regulatory teams and the clinical teams had confidence that these risks identified were being controlled. We also looked at refinement of requirements. So we were strategically working from the top level and decomposing these down so that the quality and regulatory, who were specifically concerned with 62304 and ISO 13485 requirements, we ensured that these were being met, as these compliance tasks were added specifically as requirements. So looking at risk controls, having design review meetings as part of the sprint. Also, verification validation activities. So because we had more granular requirements, there were better effective testing, and the teams were able to automate where possible. So we worked together to ensure compliance from the start, so that test plans were approved before execution. And there was better visibility of working activities, and therefore the compliance team again were confident that the acceptance testing has passed before going on to the beta testers. So we also identified regulatory processes that needed to be part of the release process. So this was formal review and acceptance. So this, again, ensured that the compliance team were confident that everything was done prior to the technical file submission. So therefore, we had better overall results. So the release was a lot smoother, the compliance oversight was better, and there was better communication between the teams. We had confidence in our technical file submissions. There were much happier customers, and because you've got happy customers, you have increased revenue.
So financial technology, so we're talking about banks, investment banks, hedge funds, pensions, fintechs. So 14 years ago, a typical company in this space would be deploying software quarterly or twice a year. This was an extremely painful process which could take weeks to prepare, often had to be done over a weekend, bringing in staff members, and it was often prone to failure and they'd have to roll back or the system would be unavailable. For a bank, that's particularly causing the regulator because the customers can't access their funds, but also it loses them money. Today, some of these companies have adopted new processes, and this means they can deploy software changes either weekly, daily, or hourly. This can be relatively painless. The Financial Conduct Authority conducted a workshop in 2019 with organisations in the sector, and one of the results they found was that small changes went through with very little failures, and large changes had double the failure rate of the small changes, and they're quite pleased with companies adopting this more iterative approach to releases and its actual risk it presents. So the techniques they've adopted is DevOps and continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is a software development discipline where you build software in such a way the software can be released to production at any time. We're not advocating software should be released at any given time. It should be a business decision when the software should be released. It should be that every software change is a release candidate, and it should be a potential release. It's up to the business when to release the software for the medical device.
So now we're going to look at software development and the last mile. So we're all generally quite familiar with the software development cycle. We have our requirements and specifications. This funnels down to the high-level design and detailed design. We go off away and make some software, and then we go and test it by unit, component, and system. We also then come to the last mile, which was the long pain and suffering that my company had. So this was involving the change control and acceptance testing of that change. And then there was the preparation of technical files, making sure everything was okay and good to go. And if you remember, I was saying this can take up to 4 months. And then submitting to the competent authority and then finally releasing.
So how do we get rid of that last mile that Heather's found so painful, and how the financial technology companies found so painful 14 years ago? In agile software and DevOps, there's the mantra, if it hurts, do it more often. It's a natural human tendency to put off difficult, painful tasks till later. But in software, that builds up a problem. It actually becomes more painful, so we put it off further, and that's why we get annual or biannual or quarterly releases that cause so many problems for financial tech companies. If we do it more often, we find solutions to the pain points. It becomes a natural activity. It's not something we put off once we start solving those pain points. So if I make ourselves deal and front up to that pain, we're going to find those solutions. So what's this going to look like? In a typical finance company, you would have a CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. And the idea is this pipeline is kicked off automatically by software every time there's a change in source control for the software. The first stage is the build. The software is built. And then this goes through a series of quality gates. It goes through unit testing, your system tests, security testing, performance testing, availability, scalability, all the items key to financial services. And once it's passed all these stages, the software is considered done and ready, and it's a release candidate. So we have Heather's software development lifecycle. At the end of each iteration of this cycle, so it could be a single user story or a single requirement, we should have a release candidate. This could also be at the end of the sprint, but it could be for every single software change. So by release candidate, we mean we need to have the built software ready for deployment, but also we need the technical file and anything else that needs to go for a submission or needs to be stored ready for an audit. So how we deal with last mile is we actually need to remove all those activities and shift them into the software development process. We need to take those activities out of the last mile and shift them into that software development lifecycle. So acceptance testing, preparation of that documentation, and change control all become part of the software cycle. While it's not possible, in some situations, it's not possible for all acceptance testing to be moved into the development cycles. Much of it is possible, should be. Preparation of the documentation, so that could be, that's all your risk reports, that's all your traceability matrix verification reports, should be assembled as part of the software development cycle. And the software change isn't considered complete unless that documentation and technical file is ready. And then it goes to change control. Software development tools have really strong change control mechanisms. If you shift all these activities in software development cycle, you should reuse these change controls. It forms part of the definition of done for the software developers as well as your compliance team. And this means that anytime the business wants to release your new medical device, they can choose to, and it can only take a day or a week to actually prepare the submission and submit to the competent authority. So what would a pipeline look like? So we still have our build stage where the software is built. Then it goes through your static analysis, which is required under 62304. We have our unit testing, which is our first stage of verification activities. And this goes out to your security static analysis, your SAST. Your system tests, again, your second stage, your final stage of verification activities before you go on to validation. And then you have your software composition analysis to generate your software bill of materials and SBOM. The final step after this is publishing and documentation. This is where you collect up all the relevant reports or generate them and insert them into your technical file. Because the end result is you need your working software from the build that's passed through these quality gates, but also you need your technical file ready for submission. So what's our tips for shifting left? First of all, is break down the siloed teams. Heather's mentioned how the problem with silos. Create one delivery team where you've got developers, testers, and a QA/RA representative on that team. If everybody's in the same team, they pull in the same direction. There's no chucking over the wall from one team to solve another problem. How many times are QA having to chase the developers for missing documentation? They're on the same team, they're working together, and they don't want to cause friction. Automation. Software, a lot of these reports can be generated automatically, but also good computers are really good at checking links and consistency. They can identify missing links in traceability reports, missing screenshots from verification reports. Automate as much of this activity as possible. You've got a development team. If you don't have the tools capable of doing this automation, the developers can build it quite quickly. They're skilled at doing that. It's going to make their life easier. It's going to make the QA/RA team's life easier. So do that. And the final one is documentation, engaging developers in documentation. Everybody thinks developers hate documentation, but if you take a documentation as code approach where you store the documents with the source code following the same source control system and review and change control system as the developers use, developers can update the documentation as they change the code. Because they don't have to go to several different systems, it doesn't cause friction. I could spend an hour talking about how to engage developers in documentation, but I'll just leave you with this tip. So our key takeaways.
So developers and the compliance teams need to understand each other and pull together and not away. So not be siloed away like we've spoken about, which can cause a lot of pain. We need to know what done looks like for each controlled change and each release candidate.
Use the developers change control tools. They're really powerful. You can configure what roles have to do the approvals. All those automated checks we suggested earlier can be checked, and the tools can actually stop a change being accepted if they're not passing. So reuse those tools. It reduces the frictions and engages the developers. Start off your project compliant. If you put all your documentation and all your systems and all your tools in place to begin with, you can start off from a compliant state. And every software change that is delivered, if you're checking it with the change control mechanism correctly for all those documentations and the technical file as part of your release candidate, means every change is compliant and your project is compliant throughout. That means you can then release when your business wants to without additional time wasted on the last mile.
And also automate where possible. So Alan's been very vocal about this, about automate where you can in order to free up other team members so they can focus on different and more important tasks.
A new process will take time, particularly if you're creating a delivery team with all the different roles. So don't be afraid to give it time to settle in, but also don't be afraid to make changes. If you use the key principles and actually have a team and get people to talk and discuss their problems and get them to work together, pulling in the same direction, you will find the right approach. Thank you for listening to us about shift left compliance. This has been a lightning session. If you want to come discuss more details with us, come and find us around the conference. If you need to find us, we'll be on stand B40. Thank you.
Thank you.